then that makes sense.
Sounds good. Thank you.
You can go ahead, Councillor Neal.
Thank you very much. Tonight's meeting, we have, I believe, 4 pieces for public meetings. And I'm about to read the notice of collection for those first meetings. Personal information collected as a result of this public hearing and process is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on the matter. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes, which will be available to the public. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning Services. The purpose of public meetings is to present planning applications in a public forum as required by the Planning Act. Following presentations by the applicant, committee members, will be afforded an opportunity to ask questions for clarification or further information. The meeting will then be opened to the public for comments and questions. Interested persons are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. Interested members of the public can email the committee clerk or the assigned planner if they wish to be notified regarding a particular application. No decisions are made at public meetings concerning applications unless otherwise noted. The public meeting is held to gather public opinion. An exception to this rule is combined reports, which consolidates the public meeting in the comprehensive reports. These applications are deemed by staff as straightforward and routine. The business practice has been in place for a number of years and is received by the applicants as efficient customer service and effective use of committee time. Please note that staff use discretion in determining if an application can be a combined public meeting comprehensive report to expedite the approval process. Public meetings reports are provided to inform the public of all relevant information. Information gathered is then referred back to the planning services staff for the preparation of a comprehensive report and recommendation to the planning committee. This means that after the meeting tonight, staff will be considering the comments made by the public in their further review of the applications. When this review is completed, a report will be prepared making a recommendation for action to this committee. The recommendation is typically to approve with conditions or to deny. The committee then makes a recommendation on the applications to City Council. City Council has the final say on the applications from the city's perspective. Following council decision, notice will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the local planning appeal tribunal, but that person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Kingston before the bylaw is passed, that person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. So we'll move on to our first public meeting tonight, which concerns 262 Wellington Street. And I believe the Boulevard Group will be doing a presentation.
Just to confirm, is it Mr. Adams? Are you conducting the presentation tonight?
Jason will be leading that.
Okay, so I'll go to Jason, then we'll get the presentation up.
Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. Thank you to members of committee, staff, and those of you from the public who have joined us this evening. My name is Jason Sands. I'm a registered professional planner here in the province of Ontario, and I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Alex Adams, who will assist throughout this presentation, primarily in any questions or follow-up preceding the presentation. But as noted, we are here to discuss and present to you the application for 262 Wellington Street, and the applications for zoning bylaw amendment and a concurrently submitted site plan control application. Next slide, please. So very quickly, from a locational context perspective, the map illustration on the right-hand side of your screen will depict with the red dot where the subject property is in the downtown of the city of Kingston. Largely, it's the midway point between Bay Street to the north and Princess Street corridor to the south, located on the west side of Wellington Street. It is, according to the city's official plan, a part of and located within the downtown central business district. Some neighboring uses and parcels that may be of familiarity include to the east the Barrett Street parking surface parking lot, as well as the Leon Center. The LCBO and the Good Life Fitness are also to the southeast of the parcel. North of the parcel, subject property is Doug Fleur Park, and to the west is Artillery Park. Directly behind the subject property, when I say behind, I'm saying to the west, and those houses would front onto Rideau Street. Those are primarily composed of residential uses in lower form, and that spans up further northward as we move away from the central business district, where the designation changes from central business district to residential. From a transit perspective, the subject property is well served and in very close proximity to multiple stops. It's also within walking distance of the downtown transfer hub or transfer station. Next slide, please. So the subject property from a streetscape perspective and an illustrative perspective, you can see on the screen is a 2.5-story red brick facade, which is essentially a mirror image of each other on either side. The subject property is just shy of 300 square meters in size, and it's historically been used for mixed-use building or mixed-use purposes. At grade was formerly Dawson Dental, a commercial space, and the underutilized basement of that building was used for storage and excess ancillary uses that augmented that commercial use at grade. The upper stories of this building have historically have functioned as residential units. So each side contains one unit, each occupying 2 bedrooms. And the proposal before you tonight is to internally convert that main level that formerly housed Dawson Dental, as well as the basement of this building, to 3 additional dwelling units, which would thereby increase the total dwelling unit count to 5 dwelling units on the subject property. Next slide, please. So I've gone over previously where the parcel sits related to its surrounding in the downtown core, but just some illustrative examples and mapping to show where that parcel is. The illustration in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen shows the OHIP building and the Barrett Street surface parking lot with the Leon Center, as well as the Food Basics grocery store in behind. That's looking northeast up Wellington Street and down Plaque to Arms. The image in the top left shows over that parking lot, showing the subject property with the red star, as well as the similar scale and built form of the 2.5-story residential developments that are located fronting Wellington, as well as those in behind, which front onto Rideau Street. The illustration in the bottom right-hand corner just shows that proximity from the Princess Street corridor to the south and its location to the main or the core of the central business district. Next slide, please. So as mentioned previously, the subject property is designated central business district and it's in the City of Kingston's official plan. It's identified as red on the map to the right, and you'll see to the right of the subject property, the residential, the North Block areas to the east have a special policy area. So that's why those are slightly different coloration on the map. To the northwest of the subject property is the residential designation, moving up into the more primarily residential neighborhoods. So the proposal to internally convert the subject property from a mixed-use building to an entirely residential building has been reviewed with respect to the high density policies of the City of Kingston's official plan. Because the proposal exceeds 75 units per net hectare, the tipping point pushes us into that high density policy set. And from our perspective and our opinion, the proposal conforms to and satisfies the intent of the section 2.7 and section 3, which speak to the high density residential policies within the official plan. What's not contained on this slide, and it is important to note, Schedule DH3 of the City of Kingston's official plan denotes where mandatory commercial is required at grade in the downtown central business district. And it should be known that this subject property is located outside of that area as identified on the schedule. So it is, in our opinion, consistent with the intent of the official plan as it falls outside of that area of mandatory ground floor commercial. Next slide, please. From a zoning perspective, implementing that central business district OP designation, the subject property is zoned central business system C1 within the downtown and harbor zoning bylaw 96-259. As you can see on the map to the right, the majority of the properties all fronting Wellington Street, the west side, of Wellington Street, spanning from Queen up to Bay, are all in that same C1 zone. And the proposal before you is to create a site-specific C1 zone. What that would entail would retain all of the commercial central business system uses that are currently permitted to accommodate on the subject property, as well as introduce the site-specific provision to allow for the ground floor of this subject property to function in its ability to accommodate 2 dwelling units at grade level. I just also want to point out before I leave that slide that the site-specific commercial zone would allow for either commercial uses to be accommodated or residential uses to be accommodated. It wouldn't negate the ability for this subject property to revert back to accommodating commercial uses in the future. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, the proposal is to internally convert this building to 5 residential units in total, 2 of which already exist on the upper level, and the 2 units on the upper level currently accommodate 2 bedrooms each. So they're 2 units with 2 beds, and the proposal for the basement unit is to accommodate 1 bed. The proposal to accommodate the 2 units at grade would accommodate 3 bedrooms in total. So in total, the proposed residential development would be 5 residential units with 8 bedrooms on site. The existing accesses from the building are proposed to be maintained. So from the front, the streetscape along Wellington Street would be unaffected, and the existing facade would be upkept. The existing accesses would be utilized. and the additional accesses to the lower and main level units would be accommodated through entrances on the south side of the subject property, accessed via the driveway that runs along that southern interior lot line. Now, the subject property is affected by a right-of-way that does cover the southern portion of this parcel and provide access to the neighboring adjacent parcel. So with that and the requirement that that right-of-way remain unobstructed, the parcel is not able to adequately accommodate on-site vehicular parking. There is an ability for the owner to accommodate 4 bicycle parking spaces in a covered and secure location along that southern side, and that's what's being proposed. Now, the 4 covered secure bicycle parking spaces exceed the requirement of the 3 that are required. We would love to be able to fit 5, so it would be per unit and match with a 1-to-1 ratio. And that's something that we are looking at and working with staff on through the continued processing of the site plan control application. Next slide, please. So before you on this slide is the proposed site-specific zone that has been crafted to accommodate this internal conversion. As you can see, the permitted uses have been expanded upon to allow for the multi-res development. The density has been calculated to allow for the 5 units. Amenity provided at 20 square meters, and removing the requirement for 1 on-site parking space as the parcel is subject to that right of way. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up, in summary, the proposal is to internally convert and not expand the existing footprint or gross floor area of the existing building to accommodate additional residential development in the city's downtown service core. In my opinion, the proposal is consistent with the 2020 provincial policy statement. The proposal also complies with the intent and satisfies the intent of the City of Kingston's official plan that seeks to increase densification of the downtown core that's in an appropriate built form and a context that's that's consistent with its surrounding development. As mentioned, the proposal seeks to maintain that streetscape and the aesthetics, that high quality aesthetics of the building by reutilizing the existing access points that connect out to both the south interior side lot line and the driveway, as well as the streetscape of Wellington Street. And in our opinion, this proposal represents appropriate and is good land use planning. And then I think that's the last slide. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. I'll now turn to the city planner to just tell us about the notifications that went out.
Through you, Mr. Chair. A notice was provided in accordance with the Planning Act for this application with a notice of this public meeting provided by advertisement in the WIG standard 20 days in advance of the public meeting. In addition, a courtesy notice was placed in the Kingston WIG standard. To date, there have been no inquiries either by telephone or written for this application.
Thank you, Mr. Wick. I'll now turn to the committee to ask any questions. We'll save our comments till the second go round, but any questions you may have of the planner, that would be fine, or of the proponent. Oh, there you are. I can now see you. I think I saw Councillor Kiley's hand up. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, one question about amenity space. It was noted in the slides that the proposal is to have 20 square meters, I believe. And if I understand the official plan right, the minimum should normally be 54 square meters. So I'm wondering why you have the amenity space. What's the reason before us for that change?
Through you, Mr. Chair, can you hear me? Everybody, Councillor Kylie?
Yes, it can.
So according to zoning bylaw 96-259, the requirement for amenity is 10 square meters per dwelling unit. We are proposing to add 3 dwelling units, so therefore we'd require 30 square meters of amenity on site. We are unable, or the subject property is unable to accommodate outdoor amenity space that meets the requirements of that threshold. So through this application, we're proposing to recognize what may be recognized outside from the 20 square meter perspective of on-site amenity. We've also, through the site plan commentary with city staff, have been working to delineate clearly inside, although it doesn't necessarily satisfy the requirement of the zoning, and that's one of the reasons for the requested reduction. The small unit count from a bedroom perspective with the larger living areas that are proposed inside can be not used in lieu of outdoor amenity space, but will be looked at from a site plan perspective to ensure that there is sufficient space to function for each resident of
every individual unit.
I think you trailed off a little at the very end. If you could repeat that last sentence, Mr. Sands.
Yeah, sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Your voice is very, very low, and it was strong at the beginning.
I'm not sure what happened.
Neil, I believe Mr. Adams has a comment that he might make as well, so perhaps we can go to him and then we can work our way back to Mr. Sands if necessary.
That would be fine. Mr. Adams.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Just to expand on Jason, I'm not sure where he's gone. We've designed this with its small bedroom counts in the units, and we've kind of oversized the kind of the living space internally. We really looked at all options on this one, but the site is so constrained with the building. We just couldn't accommodate any more amenity space externally, which is why we've kind of done the smaller units inside with the larger kind of living dining area to try and compensate for that as much as we could.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And sorry, I misspoke. I said official plan. I meant zoning bylaw. So just to be sure that I'm clear, the 54 square meters that's referred to in section 5.5 is about outdoor space. And you're saying there's not room, so you try to make up for it indoors. Is that right?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Correct. I think the 54 you're referring to is when you're trying to group the amenity space, it's trying to accommodate them in groups of minimum of 54 square meters. So it's not a lot of little pieces sort of thing. We only have the one spot, which is the area at the front, which is the front porches, etc., in front of the building.
Okay, that's fair. You're constrained. Thanks.
Any further questions? Thank you. Councillor Hutchison, who is, I believe, the district councillor. The floor is yours.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, this appears to have gone, it was you want to make it residential. It clearly was, then it was commercial. And then before that, can you give us a bit of a history of the property? It obviously was residential before that at some point.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, I don't have the full history of the building. I just know for many years it's been the dental office, and clearly from the built form it was residential at some point. In between and when the switch was, I'm not sure.
I see. So generally, in the official plan, we're looking for commercial at street level, which formerly we had. I don't know, was the dentist evicted or did they leave?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the dentist actually relocated to another commercial space closer to Princess Street.
Okay. So what would your response be to a question about that if we need and desire commercial at street level, why would we allow this to go residential?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the official plan does permit solely residential buildings in this location. We're not seeking any changes to the official plan whatsoever. It is just the zoning is not up to date with the official plan. As Jason mentioned, the schedule in the OP, which highlights mandatory commercial frontages, is not applicable in this location either.
Can everybody hear me through?
Yes,
Mr.
we
Chair?
can.
Sorry, I'm not sure what happened there.
We can
Through
hear
you,
you loud and clear.
Mr. Chair, just to add to that question in response by Mr. Adams, I just want to point out to the fact that the proposed site-specific zoning has been drafted in a way in which all commercial uses that are currently permitted on the subject property would thereby be continued to be permitted into the future. And this site-specific would allow for residential and/or commercial should there be a switch or a change of market demand in the future.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, we'll leave the committee portion and open it up to the public. If there's anybody from the public who'd like to speak to this.
Sure, Mr. Chair, there's currently 7 members of the public in the gallery, so I will ask that they raise their hand using the raise hand tool within Zoom if they wish to speak to the committee.
Thank you.
Again, to raise your hand, please use the participants icon to load the menu on the right-hand portion of your screen. And then within that menu, there is a button at the bottom that says raise hand. Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing any hands raised at this time, so I'll leave it with you whether or not you need.
Thank you very much. I'll go back to the committee quickly. If there's any further, this would be a good time for comments if you have a comment or any further questions. I have one very quick comment. If you could take the chair.
I do and recognize you.
Thank you. Just very quickly. I applaud the fact that you recognize there's parkland in the vicinity. I get I become a scold, frankly, when people try to say they don't need outdoor amenity space because there's a park 3 blocks away. So I appreciate that wasn't part of the conversation today. Just to give you a heads up, I'm going to comment, as we often do, about site plan issues. We typically request or strive to have 1 bicycle parking allotted to every unit of residence. So that would probably mean 5 instead of 4. If it's at all, unless there's an overwhelming reason not to, I think we should do that. Also, with parking spaces, because there's a few environmentalists on this committee, we usually try to recommend one EV charging station in the parking area to accommodate the future, if not the present. So I'm not sure if Mr. Sands or Mr. Adams would like to comment on those observations.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Mr. Sands here. I just want to thank you for your commentary with respect to the parkland commentary in the presentation, pointing out the proximity to Douglas Fleur Park, Confederation Park, Artillery Park, etc. I was not necessarily attempting to justify the project with respect to those proximities, as opposed to provide it from a site context perspective. But I apologize if that came off.
No, I appreciate that. I wasn't scolding you, honestly.
So thank you for that. With respect to the on-site bicycle parking, I absolutely understood through the initial review in submission to this application. It was only noted that 4 bicycle spaces may be accommodated while assuring that that right of way maintains sufficient clearance for vehicles for any other abutting parcel. But we, as applicants, have been in communication with city staff, and we continue to be, and we will do our best to obtain that additional space, as again, recognizing the 1-to-1 ratio is desired. And lastly, the charging station, unfortunately, we're not able to provide any parking on site from vehicle perspective, but absolutely do noted for any other project. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will reclaim the chair. Thank you. Any further questions, comments? Seeing none, I'll declare this portion of tonight completed. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to our next meeting.
Yuko, we're just wondering if you're presenting the next file or is Kelsey?
I'm sorry. What was that, James?
Oh, sorry, I was just checking whether Yuko or Kelsey would be presenting the next file. My apologies.
No problem.
James, Kelsey will be. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, the next public meeting has to do with 1024 Portsmouth Avenue, and FO10 Consultants are the planners of record. So the floor is yours.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
We can.
Perfect. Well, good evening, Mr. Chair and members of Planning Committee. My name is Kelsey Jones, and I'm a land use planner with FO10 Planning and Design in Kingston. I'm here tonight on behalf of our client, the owner of 1024 Portsmouth Avenue, to present an application for minor zoning bylaw amendment for the subject property. Next slide, please. 1024 Portsmouth Avenue is located in the Strathcona Park neighborhood, north of Princess Street and south of John Counter Boulevard. The area is generally residential in nature, with dwelling types consisting of single detached dwellings, duplexes, triplexes, and apartment buildings. And building heights typically range from 1 to 2 stories. The image on this slide shows an aerial image of the surrounding area with a 600-meter walking radius and illustrates the proximity of the site to multiple parks, open spaces, and schools, as well as commercial uses within walking distance on Princess Street. Kingston Transit also operates on Portsmouth Avenue, and a transit stop is located approximately 20 meters east of the site on Champlain Avenue. Next slide, please. The subject site is currently developed with a 2-story dwelling, has a lot area of just over 962 square meters, and 15.8 meters of frontage on Portsmouth Avenue. The image on this slide provides a more detailed aerial image of the surrounding neighborhood, and as can be seen, the west side of Portsmouth Avenue has a number of residential dwellings which have front yard parking. Next slide, please. The existing dwelling is a 2-story triplex dwelling containing 3 dwelling units. 1 unit is located in the basement, 1 unit is located on the ground floor, and 1 unit is located on the second floor. Parking is currently provided in the front and side yards in an existing gravel driveway, and a pathway along the north side of the dwelling provides rear yard access. The images on this slide show the front and rear elevations of the dwelling. And I would just like to note that the owner purchased the property in 2017, knowing that it was a triplex dwelling, but was later informed by the city that a 3-unit dwelling was not permitted on the site, and at that point stopped renting the basement unit. But since acquiring the property, the owner has been paying taxes for a 3-unit dwelling. Next slide, please. As illustrated in the images on this slide, the property also contains a shed located in the rear yard and abutting the southern property line. As well, it contains a large backyard with a public multi-use trail abutting the rear lot line. Next slide, please. The image on this slide illustrates that the site is designated residential and environmental protection area in the city's official plan. And the residential designation is intended to accommodate fully serviced residential uses and supports a wide range of built forms in order to meet the full range of housing needs in the city. The environmental protection area designation boundary is generally approximate and meant to reference the end of the floodplain line and is intended to, to be maintained in its natural and undisturbed state. Next slide, please. The image on this slide illustrates that the site is currently zoned 1-family dwelling and 2-family dwelling A5 zone and environmental protection area zone in the city's zoning bylaw 8499. The 1-family and 2-family dwelling zone permits 1 and 2-family dwellings, as well as a variety of community-related uses. And the environmental protection area zone does not permit any buildings. Next slide, please. The intent of this application is to permit a 3rd dwelling unit in the basement of the existing 2-story triplex dwelling. As well, the application seeks to permit 2 parking spaces in a tandem arrangement in the existing driveway and 1 parking space in the front yard. The driveway is proposed to be slightly extended to the minimum needed into the rear yard to ensure that the 2 tandem parking spaces are located behind the front wall of the main dwelling. Common exterior amenity area is proposed to be provided in the front and rear yards, and 3 covered secure bicycle parking spaces will be provided in the existing rear yard shed. The image on this slide is the concept plan for the site and illustrates the location of parking, the bicycle storage shed in the rear yard amenity area, as well as the pedestrian walkways to both the front and rear building entrances. Next slide, please. This slide provides the proposed basement unit floor plan, as well as the existing floor plans for the 1st and 2nd floor, which will not be altered as a result of this application. I just want to note just on this slide that the basement floor plan was actually prepared so that the front yard is at the top of the plan, whereas for the 1st and 2nd floors, the front yard is shown on the bottom. So just if you're looking and comparing them on the slide, just to keep that in mind. The existing 2 units each have 2 bedrooms, and the proposed basement unit will have 1 bedroom. The applicant intends to complete renovations to refresh and revitalize the interior of the basement unit, as well as to introduce floodproofing measures as recommended by the Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority. As well, a vestibule will be created in the entrance of the basement dwelling unit to separate common features shared by all units, including laundry facilities from the 3rd dwelling unit. Next slide, please. So the existing A5 zone does not allow a 3-unit dwelling, and this application for minor zoning bylaw amendment seeks to rezone the subject site to a special 3 to 6 family dwelling zone and maintain the environmental protection area zone on the property. This approach has generally been taken recently for other triplex dwellings on the west side of Portsmouth Avenue. The dwelling complies with the current A5 side yard setback requirement of 1.2 meters. However, the new B zone requires a minimum setback equal to 2/5 of the height of the main dwelling, which in this case equates to 3.8 meters. The existing dwelling has a south side yard setback of 2.5 meters, and a technical amendment is necessary to recognize this existing site condition. Similarly, the dwelling complies with the A5 aggregate side yard setback requirement of 3 meters. However, the new B zone requires a minimum aggregate side yard setback equal to the height of the dwelling, which equates to 9.5 meters for the site. The existing dwelling has an aggregate side yard setback of 7.1 meters, and a technical amendment is necessary to recognize this existing site condition. The B zone requires 1 on-site parking space to be provided for each dwelling unit, and therefore 3 parking spaces are required on site. The zoning bylaw also requires parking to be located behind the midway point of the main dwelling. The intent of this requirement is to generally encourage parking to be located in the rear yard. The existing gravel driveway on the site, however, is located on the north side of the dwelling and is not wide or long enough for all parking spaces to be located behind the midway point of the dwelling. And this application is not seeking to create a new parking area in the rear yard. As well, the zoning bylaw does not currently permit parking in a tandem arrangement for triplex dwellings. We're asking to amend the parking location provisions in order to permit the on-site parking configuration as proposed, which is 2 spaces in a tandem arrangement in the driveway and 1 in the front yard. So although the amendment will allow 2 parking spaces in front of the midway point of the dwelling, 2 spaces will actually be located in the driveway and only 1 space will be located in the front yard. This amendment will ensure an efficient site configuration and allow each unit to have on-site parking. It is also proposed to amend the boundary of the environmental protection area zone to be consistent with the floodplain boundary as identified by the geodetic survey. And this will actually have the result of increasing the amount of environmentally protected area zone portion on the subject site. Next slide, please. So in summary, the subject site supports intensification due to the addition of a dwelling unit within the existing building and without requiring exterior modification. As well, the site is located in proximity to transit routes, schools, parks, and open space areas. The proposal is consistent with the provincial policy statement in that it is a compatible form of intensification and is an efficient use of service land within the city's urban boundary. As well, the proposal conforms to the official plan as a compatible form of residential intensification within a stable neighborhood. Overall, it is our opinion that this proposal represents good land use planning. Next slide, please. That's the end of my presentation, and myself and my colleague Yuko Leclerc would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn to the committee. If there are any questions, just raise your hand. Thank you. Councillor Hill.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Can we just quickly go to the planner to receive the update?
Sorry. It's been a long day. This is my third Zoom, so I apologize. Would the city planner of record like to speak to this file?
Yes, thank you, and good evening, Mr. Chair. Through you, the formal notice for this public meeting was provided in accordance with the Planning Act. There was a formal notice placed in the Kingston Whig Standard 20 days in advance of the meeting, as well as an additional courtesy notice in the Whig as well. To date, staff have not received any comments or inquiries, either written or verbal, regarding the application. And along with the applicant's agents, I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden. I'll now turn to Councillor Hill.
So just a couple things. One, I'm looking at sort of the window space in the lower unit. Would it be amenable to people being able to get out of the building if they needed to? And then my other question relates to the driveway, and that is if they reconfigured the driveway, would it be possible to extend it into the backyard so that there needn't be front yard parking?
Yes, I'll turn to the proponent planner.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So just first to address your questions about the windows. So the basement unit has 3 windows currently. And the one in the kitchen is about 1 meter wide, as well as the one in the bedroom. And then the one in the living room is about 1.3 meters wide. But through the building permit review process, the plans and the existing basement conditions will be reviewed for compliance with the Ontario Building Code. And if anything is found to be non-compliant, it will be required to be fixed prior to any tenants being in the unit. And then in terms of the driveway, so just the concept plan and the survey that were submitted shows the floodplain boundary on the site. And there is not sufficient area in the rear yard outside of the floodplain boundary. Basically, there's not enough space between the floodplain boundary and the rear wall of the dwelling to efficiently provide the necessary parking. So there is enough room in the rear yard technically to provide parking without requiring it to be in the front yard, but it wouldn't be outside of the floodplain. So that's why we're proposing it just to maintain the configuration as it is. And as well, we are recommending this parking configuration in order to ensure that the maximum amount of green space is maintained on the site.
Can I follow up?
Please do.
I'm having trouble understanding, like, who cares if the driveway is in the floodplain? What difference does that make?
That might be a question for one of our planners. I believe the province has issues with that, but I'll leave it up to the planners.
Yes, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So we have been working closely with our colleagues at the CRCA, the Conservation Authority, for this file because of the proximity to the floodplain in the EPA area. So there are often concerns with respect to putting either people or possessions, be they buildings, cars, etc., in a floodplain area. So we can certainly ask that question again from them to get clarification, but generally they do like to see as much as possible amenity areas, parking, accessory structures, everything located within a certain distance away from the floodplain. However, we're happy to revisit that issue with them and address it in the comprehensive report.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Any further questions or comments?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I see that the other agent would like to add to that comment if that's
Yes,
permissible.
please do.
Through you, and thank you, Mr. Chair. You know what, having heard Ms. Bolton's response, I think I'm satisfied with that and I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. If the vice chair can take, I also, there's clear reason why we try to avoid tandem parking situations. And they clearly aren't ideal. In this tandem arrangement, would one of the cars actually have to leave the driveway to allow the other car out? Which is the situation in a lot of tandem parking. That would be a question to the proponent, I think.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it would require one of the vehicles to be moved in order for the other to exit.
Which is exactly the reason why the city is always reluctant to approve tandem parking. It's a nightmare in the university district, and it's a nightmare anywhere. When a neighbor has to go pounding on a door at 11 o'clock at night to ask somebody to move their car, it doesn't make for a good neighborhood, I don't think. So any way that you can accommodate parking without making it tandem, I think would be preferred. Having said that, I just want to make a quick comment. There are so many, or were so many, illegal third basement apartments right across the city. And I appreciate that the new owner is endeavoring to bring this into compliance. And I've always supported somebody trying to make an illegal unit legal again. But having said that, there is buyer beware, and particularly, in the case of often real estate agents sell without doing due diligence, without telling people, sell it as a triplex, when in fact it isn't a legal triplex. But I appreciate that the owner's trying to bring it into compliance, and I will support it as long as it meets parking regulations and the regulations of the building code, which may mean soundproofing and other things like that. So, and I know that our building inspectors will be looking at all of those things. So I thank you.
You can have the chair back.
Thank you very much. Are there any further comments from city planners or from the proponents? Seeing none, I'll go back to the committee. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll go to the public. If there are any members of the public here tonight that would like to speak to this file.
If you're a member of the public and wish to speak to this, please use the raise hand tool within Zoom to identify yourself as a speaker. Mr. Chair, it does not appear that anyone wishes to speak at this time.
Thank you. I'll go back to the committee. Seeing no waving hands, I'll declare this public meeting closed. Thank you very much. And we'll go on to our third of four. And this is 1200 Princess Street. And I believe Councillor Kiley, Vice Chair Kiley, was declaring a conflict on this. So that's fine. You can go make yourself a coffee. And
Thank you. Yeah, I will be back. I have a conflict because my mother works for the Providence Care Corporation.
no problem. I appreciate that. So we still have quorum. So we will move on to the applicant is Providence Village Incorporated and FOTEN. So we'll move to the whoever the FOTEN planner is on this file.
Can I ask whoever the planner is doing the presentation to use their raise hand function so I know who to unmute, please?
Thank you.
All right, there we go, Ms. Wood, and I will get the presentation up.
Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Derek. Can everyone hear me okay?
I can, and I'm being negligent today. I should have gone, I believe I should have gone to the city planner to talk about the distribution on this.
We will, that actually comes up after the presentation,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Thank
So
you.
you're right, Ms. Wood, go ahead.
I apologize.
Thank you very much. And through you, Mr. Chair, my name is Jennifer Wood. I'm a land use planner with FOTEN Planning and Design. And I'm excited to be here tonight to present an application for zoning bylaw amendment for 1200 Princess Street on behalf of the owner, Providence Village, and also the applicant, Providence Manor. I'm joined tonight by Phil Goodfellow of G Architects. Phil is the lead architect for this project and will be helping me to deliver this presentation and answer questions or receive comments. So this is a pretty special site, and it's got a fascinating history and holds a very exciting vision for the future. Back in 2015, the Sisters of Providence decided to renew their mission and endeavored to create a village at 1200 Princess Street, which would be known moving forward as Providence Village. And their vision essentially is to transform the lands around the mother house by establishing a hub of uses that will support individuals and families throughout the Kingston community. The current application is being submitted to support the development of a new long-term care facility in the center of the village. Now, this proposal is just one piece of a broader vision and a broader puzzle for the site. The long-term plan is to continue to develop the lands with additional uses that honor the legacy of the sisters and their mission. But tonight we're going to be taking you through the current plans and proposal for Providence Manor long-term care home. Next slide, please. This is an aerial image where you can see the subject property outlined in red. The property is located in the Hillendale neighborhood on the south side of Princess Street, just west of Sir John A. Macdonald Boulevard. The surrounding community is characterized by a real mix of uses, both residential, commercial, and institutional, as well. Building heights and built form in the area really range everywhere from 1 story up to 13 stories. And the site really benefits from its proximity to transit, being located along a regular and express bus route and in close proximity to the Kingston Center transfer point. Next slide, please. This image gives, it's a little bit more zoomed in. It gives a sense of the existing conditions of the site and some of the immediately surrounding uses. This property it's quite large. It's 9.6 hectares in size, so it's almost 24 acres. And it's currently occupied by the Sisters of Providence Mother House. And there's a really interesting history associated with the property. The original house or villa, as it was called, was constructed sometime in the 1830s. And that home and farm eventually became known as Heathfield. And the Heathfield property, it remained intact during sort of the end of the 19th century and then early into the 20th century, although it did change hands a few times. And then in June 1930, the property was bought by the Sisters of Charity of Providence. And the mother house opened in 1932. It was built on the property just west of Heathfield Home, which stood until 1964 when it was removed to allow for the construction of a new wing to the mother house. And in the years following, the complex was expanded with the construction of several more wings, and the chapel was built. And then the beautiful grounds on the north side as they exist today were established. And you can see the footprint of the mother house in this aerial and in all of its wings. And it's located in the north portion of the property. The very northwest portion of the property is a heavily wooded area with a number and diverse range of mature trees. The northeast corner, sort of in that triangle area as it pokes out towards the intersection with Sir John A, is basically vacant field area. And then the area to the south is largely undeveloped and doesn't contain much mature vegetation. You'll notice sort of a funky shaped notch out of the west side of the property at the end of Phillip Street, which doesn't form part of the property boundary in red. That's the site of the future Hospice Kingston residence. That area was severed off previously for servicing reasons, but continues to be owned by Providence Village. And then in terms of surrounding uses, to the north, across from Princess Street is our commercial uses within the Peachtree Plaza. To the east are a number of apartment buildings, Crossroads United Church, a townhouse development, and beyond that, the Kingston Center. To the south are several mid to higher rise apartment buildings and condominiums. And to the west is an existing lower density residential neighborhood. Next slide, please. As I mentioned in my opening slide, Providence Village has a long-term vision to develop this property as a hub of community services and resources. The current application includes a proposal for a long-term care home in the middle of the site that would replace the existing Sydenham Street facility known as Providence Manor. The building, which is, I don't know if you can see my cursor, in the middle of the site is 6 stories in height and would contain 320 beds. And I'll get into a few more details about the building in my next slides. The current proposal also includes a 3-story parking structure just north of the long-term care facility, which would be adjacent to and sort of in between the long-term care home and the mother house. Vehicle access to both the long-term care home or Providence Manor and the parking structure will be from Princess Street via the existing driveway, and a private laneway, which we're calling Providence Way, will extend from Princess along the east side of the property to provide access to the parking structure and Providence Manor. There's an existing site entrance off of Fairview Road. This entrance is currently gated and restricts access for only service and emergency purposes. And this situation will continue to be the case moving forward. It will continue to serve as a service and emergency access point only. The long-term care facility and the private parking structure will contain some accessory commercial uses, which I'll speak to in a moment. And finally, the long-term vision for the site includes community gardens located just south of the proposed long-term care home. The applicant is proposing to establish a public easement over this entire area in order to grant public access and also to satisfy the parkland dedication requirements of the development. Next slide, please. So I'll briefly just walk you through some of the details of the buildings themselves. This is the proposed footprint of Providence Manor long-term care home. As you can see, it features sort of a longer, narrower main structure with 2 wings, which really helps to create more opportunities for windows and natural light, and also creates multiple exterior courtyard areas. There is a loading area in the top left of the image in this slide, located at the back of the building, which will be accessed from a service lane that runs between the long-term care facility and the mother house. The main entrance to Providence Manor is on the right side of the building, where there is a convenient drop-off area as well as short-term and accessible parking. There's also 3 spaces, lay-by spaces that are dedicated to, that will be used for the Meals on Wheels program. The upper levels of the building will contain 320 long-term care beds, and the main floor of the building will contain a combination of administrative components of the building, as well as just spaces that will be that will support the broader long-term care use, such as family celebration room, multi-purpose rooms, wellness, gym, salon, cafe. As well, there'll be a daycare in the main floor of the lower main wing. And as you can see, there's also outside numerous pedestrian connections that are planned to really integrate the development with the broader site. Next slide, please. So this beige box is the footprint of the proposed parking structure. Like I said, it will be 3 stories in height and would accommodate roughly 300 spaces. One of the main objectives for Providence Village is to develop the site in a way that maximizes green space as much as possible and minimizes surface parking. So Providence Village is investing in a parking structure now in order to satisfy the parking needs of Providence Manor, as well as future uses on the site to avoid an excess of surface parking. There are, I have floor plans that I can share, but there will be several smaller accessory commercial spaces proposed that will front along Providence Way. These will have small patio areas and several lay-by parking spaces as well. These commercial spaces are small in scale. We're talking less than 1,000 square feet per unit and only 3 or 4 units. And they're really intended to support the primary institutional use by providing convenient access to services and amenities for employees and visitors. Next slide, please. So at this point, for the next couple slides, I'm actually going to invite my colleague Phil Goodfellow, the project architect, to walk us through some of the more detailed design and architectural considerations. So if the clerk would be so kind as to unmute Phil Goodfellow.
Good evening. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. My name is Phil Goodfellow. I'm a partner at G Architects. And it's a great honor and pleasure to be able to speak with all of you about this very exciting project. This is an important project for Providence Village, for Providence Care, for the seniors in the Kingston community, and in particular for the sisters. This is a keystone of their vision for the property and their overall development of the site. So what is in front of you this evening in this updated proposed massing is where we are currently in the design. The drawings that were included in the application were made a number of months ago, and we continue to advance the design. And we're excited to share with you our current status and also look forward to submitting site plan where we can begin talking in more detail about the development with city staff. But what you can see from this view, this is a view looking from the southeast towards the northwest. In the foreground, you can see Providence Manor with its entry court and drop-off. Providence Manor is at the end, the termination of Providence Way. Immediately to the right of it, or to the north, is the parking garage that supports all of the current planned uses for the site. and the future uses. Again, one of the key legacy pieces for the sisters was that their generous land in the heart of this community wouldn't be used up with parking, surface parking. So we've worked to stack that parking, the parking needs of long-term care home and the parking needs of the mother house and future uses into a parking structure that then shields how it addresses Province Way with 3 retail spaces that could be used for community uses, outreach by Providence Village, or other planned retail uses. The intent is to create an active and lively street front along Providence Way, this new private laneway within the community. If we go to the next slide. So this is a view of the drop-off of Providence Manor. What you can see is the ground level connection with the main entrance to the home. Off to the left would be the entrance to the childcare space that will be run by a third party in the home. Again, the intent is to ensure that there's access to daylight and views for all of the residents in the long-term care home, and also connections back to the community through Providence Way. I'll pass it back to Jennifer. Next slide.
Great, thank you so much, Phil. So just building on that in terms of the design, one of the things we have been very cognizant of all along is ensuring that we situate the building in an appropriate location on the site in order to minimize potential impacts on surrounding uses. So to both the south and the east of the site are a number of apartment buildings and condominiums that range in height from 6 to 13 stories. But as you move west, there is a fairly clear transition down in height and scale to a neighborhood that's predominantly 1 and 2 stories. And so we've situated the building on the east side of the site to achieve the greatest separation possible from the lower density residential uses. And at 6 stories, the development will really provide that appropriate transition down in height from the 7 and 8 story buildings immediately to the east, down towards that lower residential use to the west. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates the existing zoning applicable to the site. There are 3 zones on this property. The main larger zone where the mother house is located is the special education and medical uses E2 zone, which is essentially an institutional zone. The northeast corner triangle is zoned B3, which is a multiple family dwelling zone. And the southern portion of the property is within the multiple family dwelling B1 zone. Now, none of these zones permit a long-term care facility. In fact, this zoning bylaw does not define or contemplate that use at all. So no matter where a new facility like this is proposed, a zoning bylaw amendment would be required to permit it. Next slide, please. This is an excerpt from the land use schedule to the official plan. The property is designated institutional. Institutional land uses are generally intended to provide important services to the public. And the proposed long-term care facility and its accessory uses are permitted within this land use designation. Next slide, please. So this slide attempts to summarize the nature of the zoning bylaw amendment before you. And the rezoning is intended to achieve a few things. The first, which I've already mentioned, is because long-term care facilities are not a defined use in this zoning bylaw. So this amendment will essentially introduce long-term care facility as a permitted use in this site-specific E2 zone, and will define it. We're also proposing to slightly modify the boundary of the E2 zone along the southern limit of it so that the facility doesn't straddle the adjacent B1 zone. So you can see that we've sort of accommodated a slight modification to that zone boundary. The zoning bylaw amendment would also permit limited accessory commercial uses to support the primary institutional use, including a daycare, retail store, restaurant, neighborhood store, and the private parking structure as well. We are seeking an increase in height. The E2 zone permits a maximum height of 23 meters. In order to accommodate greater floor to ceiling heights and also the mechanical penthouse, we're proposing a maximum building height of 32 meters. Now this permission would only apply to the long-term care facility in the zoning amendment. We're not applying it to the site in a blanket way. So all other existing uses and future uses, including the parking structure, for example, would still be subject to the 23 meter height maximum, or in the case of the B1 or B3 zones, the height maximums applicable within those zones. The minimum required aggregate side yard requirement, so that's the sum of the two side yards combined, that is required to be 61 meters, and we're requesting a reduction of 54.2 meters. And that's in order to allow the building to really hug as closely to that east property line as possible and away from low density residential development to the west. We are proposing reduced parking stall dimension size, similar to what we see in other rezoning applications. The minimum dimension requirement is 2.7 by 6 meters, and we're requesting 2.6 by 5.2 meters. These dimensions have been implemented for a number of years in Kingston and have been confirmed to be functional. Within the parking structure only, we're proposing a reduced stall length of 5.2 meters for accessible spaces in order to match the length of standard spaces. This will allow for basically a greater efficiency and circulation within the structure. Parking structures are already generally pretty tight, so having the same length stalls across the board will allow for a more efficient circulation and layout. The stall width, however, will not be reduced, and the stalls will meet AODA requirements for dimensions. That being said, there are a number of surface accessible parking spaces proposed right in front of the long-term care facility, which will provide the full 6 meter length stalls. So we're not proposing that those stalls be reduced in length. And then finally, based on the gross floor area of the development, the zoning bylaw requires a total of 6 loading spaces. This is a purpose-built long-term care facility, and based on the known loading and delivery needs of this type of development, 3 loading spaces are being proposed. 2 would be for the long-term care facility, and then 1 would be behind the parking structure, which would support both the mother house as well as the few kind of commercial flex spaces at the front of the parking structure. So just to sum up, it's my opinion that the proposed development and zoning bylaw amendment represents good planning. It's consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms to the intent of the official plan as a long-term care facility is permitted in the institutional designation. The proposed use is compatible with the surrounding area and built form, and it's in proximity to transit routes, parks, and open space areas that can help support intensification in this location. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions and receive comments from members of the public and the committee.
Thank you very much. I will now correctly turn to the city planner to make comments on the file.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, can you hear me okay?
I can indeed.
Perfect. So pursuant to the requirements of the Planning Act, a notice of this public meeting was provided in the WIG standard 20 days in advance of the meeting, and a courtesy notice was also placed following that. To date, we have received 1 piece of correspondence, which is in the addendum in front of you today.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn to the committee if you have any questions or comments for the proponent planner. Yes, Councillor Hill.
Well, I mean, I will get to comments later. I'm very excited about this project, but the question I had, and this sort of relates to the Providence Care Center. One of the issues that we had there was getting public transportation into that facility. Continues to be an issue. And I wonder if you've given any consideration to how you might at some point ensure that public transportation, buses in particular, would be able to get in and access that site.
Good question. Thank you. If the planner for the proponent would like to speak to that.
Yes, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair. I think at this point, we have had some preliminary discussions with transportation staff regarding providing potential transit access to the site. As I'm sure you all know, Princess Street does have transit and transit stops. However, we do recognize that the building itself is not directly adjacent to Princess Street. What I can say is that the site is being designed to be very accessible to pickups and drop-offs for vehicles of a larger nature. So being able to come down to the site, pull up right in front and have full adequate turnaround space for all larger vehicles, be they emergency vehicles, public buses, Kingston Access Bus. The site's been designed to be able to accommodate those turnarounds. And I think we're not quite at the stage yet where we've had those detailed discussions with Kingston Transit on whether an actual stop would be provided on site.
I mean, I'm glad to hear. I hope those conversations will continue because you know there is a lot of neighborhood amenities, I guess, that folks could access. I think it would be wonderful if they could do that fairly easily by accessing public transportation. So I hope we will continue to look at. What's your target date for shovels in the ground?
I might actually turn to my colleague Phil, who has a much better handle on the construction timeline. Phil, I'm putting you on the spot.
Yep. No, that's great. So the Ministry of Long-Term Care has provided deadlines for redevelopment of long-term care homes. And as you know, this is a redevelopment of Providence Manor. Our hope is to have shovels in the ground next year, 2021, probably later in the year. And we anticipate that it would be approximately 2 years construction after that before we get to have move residents in for their first resident day.
That's great. As you know, I'm not getting younger, so good luck with it.
You look quite young here, so.
Thank you very much. I'm probably looking to book a room as well, but that's okay. Any further? Yes, Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Councillor Hill. I mean, this is well look forward to. I think at the moment there's a lack of. Is this considered a seniors residence or a nursing home? I think you said nursing home.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's a long-term care facility.
Long-term care.
It's,
okay.
Yes, essentially a nursing home.
Okay. So I was concerned about the access bus too. There's a letter there, which perhaps you can speak to the access bus people. We don't want a repetition of what's gone on at Providence Care Hospital. That's really inefficient. But if it's mostly a nursing home, then I don't think all that many people will be taking the bus out of there. I don't think they'll want to bring the bus in because of express bus service on Princess Street. So maybe the odd bus or something, I don't know, but you'll find that out when you talk to them. I was a bit concerned about the notion of around the parkland dedication and that an easement would be supplied to the space which would allow public access. I'm just wondering, the mother house is being private property for decades. And so how will people know that there's public space behind these private buildings?
Thank you, Councillor Hutchison, and
Given that.
through you, Mr. Chair. I think like any successful public space or privately owned public space, signage will be quite critical. This property has a very long-term vision for development, and you know, future uses are proposed throughout. So I think it's almost like this plan is almost a living plan or a living document, and the site will evolve and develop over time. So I think the intent is that the access be provided off of Phillips Street. So there would actually be walkway and easement that would extend at the end of the cul-de-sac bulb, and then would kind of walk through the grounds and then provide access to the community garden space. So certainly through signage and appropriate wayfinding, that I think are things that can be dealt with pretty well through the site plan control process, that the access can be identified to that open space. And in terms of the space being accessed by an easement, the parkland dedication bylaw does provide that option, as opposed to, you know, traditional conveyance of land to the municipality. It does require that double the amount of land be set aside for parkland purposes when you're proposing an easement as opposed to a traditional conveyance. And the area we're proposing more than doubles the minimum requirement from an area perspective. But I appreciate that comment, and I think there's going to have to be some some thought given to how that space is designed, and also its access and signage and wayfinding.
Is it thought that the road into the long-term care facility is going to be extended down to Elmwood or Phillips?
So Elmwood is to the south. At this point, it's not proposed to be extended through. I think there's a really strong desire, at least for vehicles. I think there's a really strong desire, and we've heard this from the surrounding community through years of consultation, that there's a concern with potential through traffic. So for vehicles, it's not intended to go straight down to Elmwood, but potentially through, you know, future development of that southern portion of the site, a pedestrian connection would maybe be appropriate there and would be considered.
Well, it's just a matter of efficiency, depending on how much you're going to, how much more residential you're thinking of putting in there.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps it's not even really being thought about at the moment. Do you know?
About the residential component to the south?
Yes, further beyond what's proposed here.
There were discussions which are not on the table anymore, and at this point, I think there aren't any imminent plans for that to be developed. But I think the long-term intent is still for residential use in the southern portion. There are no imminent proposals at this time.
I can speak to the master planning period that we did about 4 or 5 years ago with the sisters, and the intent in the master plan for the village was always that it would become a destination rather than somewhere that you drove through. So that is why the streets do not expand and connect to some of the surrounding Phillips and Fairview. Well, it connects to Fairview just through internal siteways, but it's been anticipated that it's a village that you come and you experience and you participate in rather than just passing through. And that's why we've also added destinations in there, whether it's the community gardens, the daycare, or some of the retail spaces to kind of support that idea of coming and inhabiting the village.
Okay. Well, I mean, again, I welcome the development, because especially for its purposes, and as for the parkland dedication or otherwise, hopefully I've flagged that for staff and the planners. I think that's all my questions for now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to the public. If there are any members of the public who would like to speak to the proposal before us.
Mr. Chair, we have a few members of the public who wish to speak. We will begin with Mr. Garrettson, who I will ask that, okay, his microphone is now on, so please go ahead, Mr. Garrettson.
Can you hear me?
We can indeed, John.
Yeah, it's John Garrettson here, and this site has a very close attachment to myself and my family, and that our entire family pretty well at one time or another worked for St. Mary's River Lake Hospital. And the first job that I ever had in the summer was right at Heathfield in 1957, when I was in charge of cutting all those beautiful lawns for the entire summer and pulling out all those weeds. So it's got a very close attachment to it. The issue has already been raised, and my main concern is what's going to happen to the property, to the most southern part of the property, which is right next to Bowling Green. And the reason why I say that is that I was also involved, and still am involved, with Hospice Kingston. And at one time, when the Hospice Kingston zoning was approved, Homestead Land Holdings had a plan to create high-rise apartments that would have completely overshadowed the hospice property. And so my main question is, are there any plans currently in the works with respect to that southern part of the property? I noticed that in some of the slides that were presented, and I've got the greatest of admiration for the Sisters of Providence. They've done an awful lot of good work in the community over the last 150 years, which goes well beyond many other organizations. But are there any plans currently? I understand that Homestead Land Holdings withdrew that proposal, and so that have they withdrawn that proposal to build next to the Bowling Green apartments? And it in effect will become a landlocked piece of land if this beautiful new building gets built. What are the plans with respect to the southern part? Because on some of the slides, the planner for the sisters very convenient to show the entire property, and another slides it all of a sudden doesn't show the bottom X number of acres that are right next to the Bowling Green apartments. So my simple question is, what are the plans with respect to that property? Are they still proposing high-rise development along the same lines as the Bowling Green apartments on that piece of the property, which is immediately adjacent to the Bowling Green apartments? Thank you. And it's good to see all of you.
Thank you. Yes, whoever the next person in the queue for speaking from the public, that would be great.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can indeed.
Thank you. My name is Terry Eastersheen, and I'm a resident of Fairview Road. And while I certainly support this endeavor, I have a couple of questions with respect to the service and emergency access point that is referred to with respect to Fairview Road. So I'm wondering, does the service access mean for construction? There are many young families on Fairview Road, and we do not have sidewalks. And I'm just concerned about if the whole service, if that access will be for construction, because obviously our little street will be very busy if in fact that is the case, or will all the construction be via Princess Street?
I should have pointed out at the beginning, if you can identify your name and your address.
Yes.
And also all of the questions go kind of en masse from the public, and then they're all answered by the planners at the end of the process.
Perfect.
I apologize for not explaining that.
No problem, Jim. My name is Terry Easter Sheen, and I live at 115 Fairview Road, just 3 houses down from the service and emergency access point.
Thank you. And did you have any further questions?
No, that would be all my question about what, if someone could elaborate on what exactly the service access component is. Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public to speak?
Mr. Chair, at this time, it does not appear that anyone else wishes to speak, so perhaps you can give them a first and final call.
Sounds good. We'll go to the proponents, planners to answer those comments and questions.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to those members of the public for attending tonight and for providing those questions. And I'm thinking it might be helpful if the clerk can bring up slide number 4 for my presentation, please, just so we can all look at the plan again. Great, thank you. So I believe what Mr. Gerritsen was referring to is the sort of southern white rectangular area of the property, which is north of Elmwood, although Elmwood, interestingly, ends at either end of the property. It's not actually a municipal road along that southern frontage. Yes, you're correct. There were previous development applications put forward by Homestead for several mid to higher rise residential buildings in that location. For various reasons, those applications were withdrawn. There is a long-term vision for this site that was developed by the sisters and the community, and I think there was and continues to be a vision to see that portion of the property developed with residential uses that will be required to integrate an affordable housing aspect. That's always been the vision of the sisters, and I think for future interested parties in developing those lands in partnership with the village will continue to be a requirement. At this point in time, the development applications before you and with the city that's under review are only for the long-term care facility and for the parking structure. To be frank, if there are other discussions going on about the southern portion of the property, I'm not privy to them. But at this time, there are no immediate plans for development on that portion of the site. Ms. Easter Sheen, thank you for your comments. And I know folks on Fairview have had great involvement over the years in consultation efforts with the sisters and with developing a vision for the site. And I know that one of the biggest, I guess, concerns or comments received was the desire to see that end of Fairview not open up as a regular thoroughfare that would drive traffic through the neighborhood. So just emphasizing that that existing situation will continue. We are sort of early days in the grand scheme of things, as aggressive as the overall timeline for construction is. We are at the zoning stage, so I don't know that necessarily staging and construction movement plans are in the works at this point. And Phil, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's a component that will come moving forward when we're better through the municipal planning process and towards building permit process. But I think we've heard your concern, and with respect to having construction vehicles accessing the site from Fairview and the preference that it be from Princess Street.
I think, Terry, just to add, we understand and we hear your concern, and from the perspective of construction traffic, the easiest frontage is Princess Street, which is our longest frontage. So though we're still in development of the overall means and methods of construction and mobilization on the site, I do not believe there's any contemplation of moving construction traffic through local streets. And the intent has always been to maintain the current service and fire access only for that portion of the property near the Spirituality Center.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak? Seeing none, I think all of the questions have been answered. We'll go back into the committee. If any member of the committee have any further comments or questions? Seeing none, I just want to say this is wonderfully Canadian and 21st century. It's the Good Sisters of Providence and the United Church of Canada who are the owners. I appreciate that. So I'll declare this portion of the meeting of this particular public meeting over, and we'll move on to our very last public meeting, which is 31 Hyperion Court. I hope I got that right. And I believe it's FO10 that are the planners of record on this one as well. So I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Mike Keane from FO10 and just doing a sound check.
You sound good.
Okay, thank you. So again, my name is Mike Keane and I'm a land use planner with FO10 Consultants. And I'm here on behalf of the owners, Fari Holdings Corporation, and they own a building at 31 Hyperion Court. Next slide, please. So this is a map on the slide for those that might be listening and not watching. And the location of this site, Hyperion Court, is a property that fronts onto John Counter Boulevard, roughly halfway between Division Street and Sir John A. Macdonald. And it's located in one of the city's industrial and business park hubs. So there's a variety of businesses in the area, including the City of Kingston Planning and Engineering, as well as the Utilities Kingston building are just across the street from this site. For those that have lived in the city for a long time, you may remember this building used to house Revenue Canada. And it's located in the tip of the Alcan Business Park. So this is really the top of the Alcan lands that are to the south. Next slide, please. The image on the screen now is a zoom in on the site and a much more closer context. And the site is outlined showing the building and the parking and a undeveloped area on the east side of the property. The property itself is almost 3 hectares in size. It's a very large property with extensive frontage on 3 streets, being Hyperion, Lappins Lane, and John Counter Boulevard. And it's surrounded by very similar types of uses in terms of business park, office, lighter industrial type uses in the area. Next slide, please. So this property is designated business park industrial in the official plan. And that designation permits a broad range of employment uses as well as complementary commercial uses. And this is really the first opportunity to tell you about the application before you, which is a zoning bylaw amendment. And what is being sought is to align the much older zoning bylaw on the site with the official plan designation. Next slide, please. So the current zoning is the business park M9 zone, and it does permit a range of employment uses. That zone has been amended from time to time. It's roughly dating back to about 1992 for its latest amendments. So the M9 zone is not in compliance with the official plan. The city's done a lot of work in its official plan to really promote its employment lands and to promote flexibility within them. And it's broadened the official plan to allow a wider range of office type uses, as well as allowing the introduction of complementary commercial uses. So what we're seeking through the zoning amendment is to bring this M9 zone for this property into compliance with the official plan. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that is showing a colorized version of the property. And there's 3 points on the slide speaking to the intent of the application, which I've largely stated already, but it's broadening the range of the uses on the site. Right now, the building has vacancies, and we're hoping that by bringing the site into compliance with the official plan and expanding the uses that are allowed on the site, we'll be able to fill the vacancies within that building. Next slide, please. These are a couple of floor plans just to give the planning committee and the public an idea of how a site like this operates. So this is kind of giving you a sense of how large the building is and showing you a couple of the users that are within the building. We have Pathways, we have SNC Lavalin, an engineering firm, and Taylor Reporting. And there's a large vacant portion in the building on the second floor right now. And in a building like this, vacancies can come and go. Tenants can require more or less space as their leases change from year to year. Next slide, please. So the proposed zoning bylaw amendment will do two things. First, we looked at the primary permitted uses that were allowed, and the uses that we are proposing to add to the primary uses are uses that are not currently listed in the M9 zone, but align with the primary uses within the official plan. The second component is to introduce a range of complementary commercial uses. That's everything from your coffee shop to some of your clinic type uses. And they would similarly be limited to 25% of the gross floor area, matching the official plan requirements. And also, when we look, this building has been there for quite a few years at this point. And when we look back at the historical approvals that occurred on the site, there were a few studies that had not been conducted. And so working with city staff, they've asked that a holding provision be introduced to deal with the sensitive uses. So for example, if we want to put a daycare in this building, there would be a holding provision that a noise study and a record of site condition would have to be prepared before that daycare could come to the site. So that's another component that is included with this amendment. Next slide, please. So this is my final slide and summary. And I'm of the opinion that this application is consistent with the provincial policy statement, that the proposed uses perfectly align with the official plan, and that the intent of this application fully conforms with and is compatible with the official plan. And it also proposes uses that are completely compatible with the existing uses in the building and the surrounding building. That concludes my presentation, and I'm pleased to respond to any questions.
Thank you very much. I will turn to the planner of record to tell us about the communications.
Through you, Mr. Chair. In accordance with the Planning Act, a notice of public meeting and regular meeting was distributed in the Kingston Whig Standard at least 20 days ahead of this evening. A second courtesy notice was also distributed in the Kingston Whig Standard. At the time of, at the present time, I have not received any correspondence from any members of the public on this file.
Thank you very much. I will now turn to the committee if there are any questions or comments. Seeing none, I'll turn to our clerk. Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak?
Mr. Chair, the members of the public withdrew following the previous fight, so there is not any public comment at this point.
No problem. We will go back to the committee. If there are any comments or questions that people had. Just a reminder, this is coming forward as comprehensive report, and we can also speak to it at that time as well. So, seeing no hands up, I will call this portion of the public meetings completed. And I think we've sailed along pretty well. And the regular meeting may not take long, but if anybody needs a recess, I'd be happy to accommodate you. I see a lot of nodding heads, so shaking heads. So we'll move on to the Planning Committee meeting number 14. I'll call this meeting to order. Approval of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Hutchison. He didn't know he was seconding it, but he did. Confirmation of minutes from our August 13th meeting. I don't think Councillor Kiley was at that meeting, so he can be the seconder. Councillor Hill will be the mover. All those in favor? Carried. So disclosure of pecuniary interest. I believe Councillor Kiley already had his one and only. So we'll move on. Delegations, we have none. Briefings, we have none. Business, I will read this very quickly because I don't believe there's any members of the public here anyway, but this portion of the meeting is open to the public. The city has initiated a new process in which members of the public will have the opportunity to speak for up to 5 minutes on comprehensive reports presented before the Planning Committee. Those wishing to provide oral comments at this meeting will be invited to do so. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the local planning appeal tribunal, but that person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Kingston before the bylaw is passed, that person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. So we just have one item on our agenda, and that's the 31 Hyperion Court that we just spoke about. So I know that there could be a presentation from staff, or we can ask questions, but if there's a staff member here who would like to make a presentation, now would be the time. Seeing none, I will move into the committee. Are there any questions or comments or clarification needed? Seeing none, I'll properly ask if there's any members of the public who would like to speak, but I think they've all gone home.
They're already.
Thank you very much. Go back into the committee. Seeing no hands up, I will ask for a mover and a shaker. Councillor Hill moved, Councillor Hutchison seconded. Any further questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. We'll move on to motions. We have no more. Notices of motion. We have none. Other business. We have none. Correspondence. We have received the one piece of correspondence. Seeing no questions regarding that, the date and time of the next meeting is September 17th, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. And I've seen it, and you may want to drink lots of coffee and bring your no-dos, because it's going to be one of those meetings, I think. So I will love a motion to adjourn. Councillor Hill, Councillor Hutchison, all those in favor? Thank you very much, everybody. See you soon.